She had been keeping a separate file for 3 years. Kael knew this because he had seen the evidence of it, not the file itself, but the behavioral signature. The way Seraphine handled certain categories of correspondence with a compartmentalization she did not use for the commission case, or the succession work, or the frontier supply negotiations. A specific drawer in her portable document case, always locked when the case was closed, opened only when she was alone in the study and not when he was at the main table unless she had already decided to share something from it. He had not asked about the drawer. He had noted it the way he noted everything that might become relevant, and waited. On the morning after the founding charter review, August 18th, the Frontier still holding its late summer wait, the Noble Council reconvening 4 weeks and 6 days away, she brought the file to the main table and set it down without preamble. She said, "You should read this before we file the commission extension." He looked at the file. It was not thick. It was organized with the particular density of something that had been maintained carefully over a long period rather than assembled in a hurry, section dividers, dated entries, cross-reference notations in her handwriting, which was small and efficient and somewhat difficult to read until you had learned its patterns. He said, "How long?" She said, 3 years since I knew what I was looking at. For since I started looking. He opened it. The first section was the intelligence chain from her father's death. Lord Commander Aldrich Voss had died in year 8 when Seraphine was 12. Official cause, heart failure. She had not accepted the official cause at 12 and had not accepted it at 13 and had spent the intervening years building the case that it was not the actual cause. The chain she had documented ran through 7 nodes across 18 months of investigation. Financial irregularities in church-affiliated supply contractors. A regional church administrator who appeared in correspondence about the contractor's payment routing. A Noble Council intake log entry for a document her father had forwarded, the document subsequently absent from physical filing. A House Voss internal correspondence log modification in the week before his death. At Node 4, the regional church administrator, she had written a note dated year 9, month 7. Cannot determine whether affiliation is organizational or incidental. The church administrator's role in the payment routing may be standard institutional function. Cannot act without knowing which. Will continue documenting. He read that entry twice. She had been suspicious of the Church of Light, specifically since she connected that administrator to the chain that led to her father's death. She had not had enough to act on. She had had enough to watch, document, and refuse to let the thread go cold. The second section was what she had built from watching. Church assessment officials whose movement patterns did not match their stated pastoral schedules. Regional administrative correspondence that routed operational directives through ecclesiastical channels rather than secular ones. 3 frontier intelligence reports misclassified through a capital assessment process. The same process that had produced the misclassification she had eventually traced to the arrested intelligence officer in year 11. The third section was what she had not been able to do with any of it. She could not file a commission case against the Church of Light on the basis of a regional administrator's presence in an intelligence chain she had reconstructed privately. She could not bring a Noble Council proceeding on the basis of movement pattern anomalies that might have innocent explanations. She could not act legally. She could not act politically without destroying her capital position before she had the structural support to survive the destruction. She had written in year 10, "I have a shape without a name. I have been waiting for the name." He set the file down. She said, "The founding charter is the name." He said, "Yes." She said, "I have been suspicious of the church for 3 years. I have been unable to act on that suspicion because acting required either legal standing I didn't have or political capital I couldn't spend without ending my ability to keep investigating." She paused. "Combined with your analysis, the order named, the goal reconstructed, the governance structure documented, I now have enough to act. Not legally. Not yet. The commission extension filing will address the legal pathway. But strategically." He said, "What does strategic action look like?" She said, 3 things in sequence. She had clearly been thinking about this since the charter arrived. First, we stop treating the church as a neutral institution we navigate around. The Church of Light's services are real, and we protect that distinction in every communication, but the senior appointment structure is an order operation, and our intelligence work has to proceed on that assumption. Second, I begin the political preparation for the Noble Council reconvening. Not the full revelation. We don't have the complete appointment mapping, but the framing. The distinction between the Church's services and the Order's infiltration. That framing has to be in place before the evidence arrives, or the evidence will be received as an attack on hospitals. She looked at him. Third, I tell you what I've been holding back from the file because I couldn't verify it independently. He waited. She said, in year 9, I identified a church assessment official whose movement pattern placed him in the Eastern Coastal District during the same 2-week window my father was examining the church's financial flows there. I documented the overlap. I could not prove contact. I could not prove the official knew my father was investigating. A pause. The official's name is in the Burin documentation you decrypted 8 months ago. He appears in the Order's regional coordination records as a contact point for Frontier Barony intelligence collection. He said, you had the right thread. You didn't have the network map. She said, I had the right thread 4 years ago. I found one end of it and I didn't have. She stopped. She did not repeat what she had said the previous evening about her father not having him. She said instead, I have the map now. I have had the shape for 3 years. I am done waiting for enough. He said, the commission extension. She said, I'll draft it this morning. The argument extends the case from Burin's frontier sabotage to the Church's governance structure, specifically the guiding council authority over senior appointments. The founding charter is the documentary foundation. The Burin documentation is the operational connection. The Commission has jurisdiction over cross-border coordination between religious institutions and frontier security threats. She picked up her pen. The filing has to arrive at the Commission's capital office before the Noble Council reconvening notice goes to members. If we file after the reconvening notice, the Order has 3 weeks to prepare their response before we speak. He said, how long to draft? She said, today. You review tonight. We file tomorrow. He said, the strategic action beyond the filing. She said, I begin contacting the 3 Noble Council members who shifted after my year 11 presentation, not with evidence, with framing. The question I need them carrying into the reconvening is not is the Church corrupt, but is there a distinction between the Church's services and the Church's senior governance that matters for how we respond to the frontier crisis? She looked at the file. I've been preparing that question for 3 years without knowing I was preparing it. He said, the Koval channel request for older demon records. She said, still running. Veth's last packet was 11 days ago. If the Order's Continental scope is what your combined analysis suggests, the demon historical records may have operational details the human records don't. He said, yes. She opened the Commission extension draft. He moved to the main table's secondary position and began reviewing the appointment mapping, the 60% he had identified, cross-referenced against her 3-year church suspicion file, looking for the gaps that would tell him where the remaining 40% hid. The work had a different quality this morning. Not urgency, they had been working with urgency for months. Something more specific, the alignment of 2 investigations that had been running on parallel tracks for years, finally sharing a single frame. She had been suspicious of the Church since she was 13 and could not prove why. He had been mapping the Order since he was 11 and could not name what he was mapping. They had the name now. They had the structure. They had enough to act, not completely, not finally, but enough to move. Outside, the southern corridor held its quiet. The eye reported nothing anomalous in the 2,000-meter radius. 112 days since the last credible probing signature. He noted the number and returned to the mapping. The quiet had never been trustworthy. It had only been a variable he was accounting for. They locked the command tent for 2 days. Not literally, the garrison continued its cycles, the supply agreements continued their deliveries, the pooled data collection points ran their standard intervals. But the main table in the command post's secondary room was cleared of everything except intelligence, and the door had a specific understanding attached to it that Kael communicated to the garrison captain in one sentence. If it isn't burning, it waits. The captain said, "Understood." Kael and Seraphine did not leave the room for 41 hours except for the necessities that 41 hours required. The map was the eastern wall. They had mounted it on the second morning of August, a physical map of Arden Vast, not the kingdom alone, from the Ironmark border in the northwest to the Gareth demon territories in the south, with the border seal chain marked in the red ink that indicated infrastructure rather than political boundary. The map was old, from the barony's military archive, and had been corrected in 6 places where Kael's intelligence had superseded the cartographer's information. The timeline was the southern wall, a horizontal axis from 130 years before present to the current date, divided into decades. Color-coded threads: blue for church institutional growth, gray for noble council political events, green for military appointments, amber for academy records, violet for demon territory contacts, black for order operational markers where they had been identified. The first 4 hours were assembly. Every primary source document they had: Birin decryption records, commission case files, Koval channel packets, Capital Network dispatches, church founding charter, doctrinal commentary, Seraphine's 3-year church file, academy personnel records including Belen's case, Silverlight order correspondence from Torrens Seleni contact, Frontier pooled data archives, Veth's demon political summaries, laid out on the floor in geographic and temporal sort order, then lifted to the walls in the sequence that the threads demanded. The next 8 hours were connection. Kael worked the institutional axis. Seraphine worked the political axis. They met at the intersections and argued about what the intersections meant, which was the productive kind of argument where both people were trying to make the picture more accurate rather than win. By hour 12, the picture was no longer a collection of threads. It was a structure. The Order of Eternal Stars had been operating for at least 130 years in documented form. The demon historical record said longer. The demon historian's phrase, "before the current equilibrium," placed the organization's demon territory operations in a period that demon reckoning treated as foundational. Veth's translation note had been precise, not ancient in the vague sense, but prior to the political arrangement that had kept demon-human large-scale conflict in a managed state for a century. The Commission's commercial records confirmed 63 years of formal incorporation in Valdris territory, which predated the kingdom itself by 6 years. The church founding charter confirmed 78 years of institutional growth under order guiding council authority, hospitals, schools, famine relief, dispute resolution courts, spiritual community infrastructure across 4 kingdoms and the Harith Sultanate's northern districts. The Reach, when assembled on the map, was not a network in the sense of a conspiracy with a central node and radiating connections. It was an ecology. The church provided the public institutional layer, the one that could not be opposed without opposing genuine services. The noble council infiltration provided the political layer, members whose voting patterns and committee assignments had, over decades, produced a legislative environment favorable to the order's long timeline. The military appointment layer operated through the Royal Steward's Office and the church's assessment process simultaneously, which explained how 7 bypassed Royal Army command appointments in 2 years had not triggered a commission investigation until Seraphine built the case from the frontier side. The academy layer was not large. Belen was the confirmed case. 2 additional personnel records showed anomalous career patterns consistent with order placement. But it was positioned specifically in the historical archives and the aura assessment research programs, which were the institutions most likely to produce people who could identify what the order was doing. The Silverlight Order in Seleni was the piece Kael had not fully integrated until Seraphine laid the correspondence on the table at hour 19. "They're not in Valdris," she said. "They're in the institution that Valdris treats as the neutral religious authority on the continent. The Silverlight Order doesn't have the Church of Light's social service infrastructure. It has doctrinal authority. Every kingdom on Arden Vast that isn't Valdris defers to the Silverlight Order on questions of aura field theology." He looked at the Seleni correspondence. Torrens' contact had obtained it through a merchant's archive routine ecclesiastical filing from a Silverlight Regional Council meeting 6 years prior. The meeting minutes included a reference to preparation timeline alignment with partner institutions in the Eastern Kingdoms. Partner institutions. Not named. Not needed to be. He said, Continental scope. She said, the restoration isn't a Valdris project. It's a Continental project. Valdris is where they're running the clearing mechanism because Valdris is where the succession crisis and the war and the demon incursion coordination are concentrated. But the structure, she gestured at the walls. The structure is everywhere. He was quiet for a long moment. The Sovereign's eye held its ambient radius through the walls of the command post, reporting the barony's ordinary nighttime activity. The southern corridors continued quiet, the garrison's patrol cycles. Ordinary activity. The ecology on the walls was not ordinary. He said, the academy placements. She said, Velen was not isolated. I flagged 2 additional records during my Year 9 archive work. I didn't know what I was flagging then. Both in the Aura Assessment Research Program. Both with career patterns that show external direction rather than organic academic progression. He said, the clearing mechanism is multi-front because the ecology requires multi-front clearing. You don't dismantle one kingdom's institutions. You dismantle the conditions that let institutions function across the continent simultaneously. She said, yes. He said, the 50-year plan I was starting to build in my head is not long enough. She said, no. They worked through the second night. At hour 34, she sat down in the chair she had not used for 6 hours and said, it's worse than I thought. He said, yes. She said, not worse in the sense of more dangerous. I already understood it was dangerous. Worse in the sense of more complete. I had been thinking of the Order as an organization that had infiltrated institutions. What this is, she looked at the walls, is an organization that has been growing institutions for a century. The infiltration metaphor is wrong. They're not inside the church. The church was built as their instrument. They're not inside the noble council. They've been cultivating council members for 60 years. The question isn't how do we remove them. The question is how do we separate the thing they built from the thing people actually need. He said, that's the surgical requirement from the founding charter. She said, at continental scale. He said, yes. She said, we need the plan. He said, I know. She said, how long? He said, 2 days after we finish this. He looked at the map. I need to finish understanding what we're actually countering before I design the counter. We're close. She stood up. She poured water from the pitcher, cold, refilled by someone during the night without disturbing them, which was the garrison captain's specific understanding of if it isn't burning, it waits. She said, the demon records from Beth. If they arrive while you're building the plan, they go on the wall. He said, yes. At hour 41, they stopped. Not because the picture was complete. The mechanism question was still open. The 40% of church appointments were still unknown. The Silverlight Order's internal structure was still largely undocumented. They stopped because a picture that was 70% complete was sufficient to plan against, and the remaining 30% would arrive in the work itself. She looked at the walls one more time. She said, devastating. He said, yes. She said, we knew it would be. He said, knowing and seeing are different. She said, yes. She picked up her document case. I'll draft the Noble Council framing letters. You build the plan. He said, yes. She left. He stood in the room with the ecology on the walls and the map of a continent that had been being prepared for something for longer than his entire previous life, and this one combined. He began to think in steps. Not 50 yet. First, he needed the categories. Military. Political. Intelligence. Institutional. The categories needed to be right before the steps could be. Outside, dawn was coming through the command post's eastern windows. The southern corridor was still quiet. He did not trust the quiet. He started writing. He finished the plan on the third evening. Not finished in the sense of complete. He had written working document at the top in the specific hand he used for things that were structurally sound, but expected revision. Finished in the sense that 50 discrete steps existed, each with a dependency chain, a resource requirement, a risk assessment, and a failure mode that did not trigger the catastrophic response a direct assault on the Order would produce. He had slept 4 hours in the intervening 2 days. Seraphine had slept, he suspected, less than that and would not discuss it. He set the document on the main table at the hour when the evening meal was ending and the command post was settling into its nighttime configuration. She came in from the study 20 minutes later, as he had expected she would. She had been tracking his work rhythm the way he tracked hers, without discussing it. She said, "Is it ready?" He said, "Ready for you to break it." She sat down. She read the preamble first, 3 pages on assumptions, constraints, and the principle that governed everything below. The order cannot be attacked directly. A direct assault on an institution embedded in services that millions of people depend on produces either martyrdom or catastrophic institutional collapse, both of which serve the order's clearing mechanism. The counter-operation must dismantle the order's control structures while preserving the institution's functional capacity. This requires complete intelligence before any visible action, sequenced political preparation before any legal action, and demonstrated alternatives before any argument about the restoration's necessity. She read the 50 steps. The structure was 4 tiers. Tier 1, Intelligence and Documentation, Steps 1 through 14. Complete the church appointment mapping. Extend the commission case to continental scope through Selene correspondence. Develop the Koval Channel's Demon Historical Archive into operational timeline. Identify the Silverlight Order's Guiding Council equivalent. Document the Academy placements. Build the forensic chain connecting Order operational records to specific institutional decisions across all 5 power centers on the map. No visible action. No public disclosure. Accumulation only. Tier 2, Political Preparation, Steps 15 through 28. Noble Council framing as Seraphine had begun. Frontier compact formalization as a demonstrated alternative to institutional collapse. The argument that the world the Order wanted to clear was a world that had already survived pressure and built functional structures. Wartime Advisory Council invocation preparation. Gareth Sultanate diplomatic contact through channels that did not route through church administrative infrastructure. Ironmark ceasefire leverage, the northern peace as evidence that managed stability was achievable. Public communication architecture, the distinction between order and institution, prepared at every level before any revelation. Tier 3, Surgical Separation, Steps 29 through 41. Replace order-affiliated church senior appointments with genuine church-aligned appointments, complete replacement, not partial, because partial failed. Noble Council Committee restructuring through the reconvening's procedural mechanisms. Military appointment review through the Commission's expanded jurisdiction. Academy personnel review through the assessment program's own governance, which required identifying the Order's placement mechanism inside the program first. Each step sequenced to prevent the network's reconstitution from the unmapped remainder. Tier 4, the Restoration Counterargument, Steps 42 through 50. Not a single event, a sustained demonstration. The Compact's operational success. The Southern ceasefire architecture. The Demon Peace faction's existence as evidence that coexistence was achievable. The Wartime Advisory Council as a model of lawful command continuity. The Commission case as institutional accountability functioning under pressure. The argument, built over years rather than declared in a single moment. The world you want to clear is already building something better. The restoration is not necessary. The clearing is the crime. She read for 4 hours. He worked at the secondary table on the appointment mapping, the 40% gap, the cross-border documentation weakness. The 3 positions in the Harris Sultanate's northern ecclesiastical district that the Bahrain records referenced, but the commission files did not yet name. At hour 3, she said, Step 17. He looked up. She said, the Ironmark ceasefire as political evidence. You have it in Tier 2 as a supporting argument for the Compact's viability. It needs to be in Tier 1's documentation chain. The ceasefire terms themselves contain the Ironmark's acknowledgement that frontier auxiliary forces conducted legitimate military operations. That's a formal record from a foreign power acknowledging the Compact's operational legitimacy. It's not just evidence of stability. It's evidence of recognized legitimacy. He said, you're right. She made a notation in the margin. At hour 4, she closed the document. She said, 12 steps. He said, yes. She said, I'll have the marked version by morning. He said, yes. She took the document to the study. He returned to the mapping. The 12th step was the one they would argue about. He knew it before she brought the marked version at mid-morning. He had read her marginal notation on step 12 when she left the room. She wrote in the margin the way she argued, precisely, with the specific notation style that meant this is correct, but incomplete rather than this is wrong. Step 12 read, identify and document the order's mechanism for the restoration, the technical process by which a unified aura field is achieved. Without this, Tier 4's counterargument remains abstract. Her notation, move to Tier 1, Step 6. Parallel track, not sequential dependency. The mechanism question is load-bearing for Tier 3 as well. If the restoration requires a specific infrastructure the order has been building through the church's institutional growth, then the surgical separation in Tier 3 must account for which church infrastructure is functional service and which is mechanism infrastructure. These are not the same surgical target. He read the notation twice. She was right. The mechanism question was not a Tier 4 problem. It was a Tier 1 problem that determined the shape of Tier 3. He had placed it in Tier 4 because he had been thinking of the mechanism as the final argument, the thing that would disprove the restoration's necessity once demonstrated. She was thinking of it as the thing that determined what to cut. Those were different operations. He wrote in the private document, she sees the political sequencing more clearly than I do. This is not a surprise. I built the plan's architecture. She sees which walls are load-bearing. At the study door, he said, Step 12. She said, you read the notation. He said, yes, you're right. I'll restructure. She said, the other 11. He said, I'll adopt them. She said, the other 11 are improvements. Step 12 is a structural correction. She paused. The plan is good. He said, it needed 12 corrections. She said, it needed 12 improvements. 1 structural correction. That's a good ratio for a first draft. She returned to the study. He restructured Step 12 and the dependency chain it affected. The plan was 47 pages. It would take years. It was the first document he had written that he expected to still be executing in 5 years, possibly 10. He was not discouraged by this. He was 17 years old and had been building toward a counter-operation against a century-old ecology since he was 8, and the plan was the first time the counter-operation had a shape that matched the opponent's scale. He walked the perimeter of the command post at the 11th hour, not for security, but for the specific cognitive function of movement. The way physical motion helped him test whether a structure's load-bearing assumptions were sound. The barony held its late August night. Garrison lamps, the distant sound of the mill that still turned because the barony's routines did not stop for plans. The southern corridor's quiet registering at the edge of the eyes range like a held breath. Step 6 would require the restricted archive materials Seraphine had subpoenaed. The doctrinal commentary had given them the restoration's goal language. But the mechanism's technical description might live in documents the Church had never intended to be read outside the Guiding Council's review chain. Tier 3 surgical targets could not be finalized until that distinction was clear. He returned to the main table and opened the mechanism track. The southern corridor was still quiet. He did not trust the quiet. He filed the working document and began. She brought the marked version at mid-morning on August 24th. He had adopted 11 of 12 changes before she arrived. The 11th was Step 31's sequencing adjustment, which he had implemented at the second hour, and which shifted the Noble Council Committee restructuring to precede rather than follow the first visible church appointment challenge, on the reasoning that political cover had to exist before any visible surgical action. The 12th, her structural correction to Step 12, he had implemented as a parallel Tier 1 track with revised dependencies in Tiers 2 and 3. The document was 49 pages now. The architecture was sounder. She read his implementation of Step 12. She said, yes, that's what I meant. He said, the Tier 3 surgical targets need the mechanism distinction before we can finalize which church infrastructure is service and which is mechanism. She said, yes, which is why I moved it. She sat down. The other 11. He said, implemented. She said, Step 31. He said, you're sequencing. Committee restructuring before visible appointment challenge. She said, good. She looked at the document. Step 44. He said, your addition. The Gareth Sultanate's Northern District Hospitals as a separate communication track from the Valdres church framing, because the Sultanate's population doesn't distinguish between Valdres politics and church services the way Valdres citizens do. The argument has to be localized. She said, yes. He said, step 44 was correct. I should have built it. She said, you built the architecture. I built the localization. She paused. That's the division. That's what we've been doing for 3 years without naming it. He said, yes. She picked up the revised document and read the implementation notes he had appended, 1 paragraph per changed step, explaining the dependency adjustment. She read them the way she read everything, completely, without skimming. At step 17, her earmark ceasefire relocation to Tier 1, she said, you added the formal acknowledgement language from Halvor's dispatch. He said, your notation said formal record. Halvor's dispatch has the earmark marshal representative's signature on the ceasefire terms. That's the formal record. She said, good. She read to the end. She said, the plan will work. He said, if we execute it completely. She said, yes. She set the document down. If we execute it partially, the order reconstitutes from the remainder. We know that. She looked at him. We execute it completely. He said, yes. The afternoon was implementation. She drafted the Noble Council framing letters, 3 versions, calibrated to 3 council members' known political priorities, each carrying the same core distinction without using the same language. He continued the appointment mapping with a restructured Tier 1 Track 6 running in parallel, which church infrastructure showed operational signatures consistent with mechanism function rather than service function. The garrison captain knocked once at the 4th hour and left a dispatch from the southern pool data collection point without entering. Kael read it at the secondary table. The southern corridor's quiet cycle had completed its 115th day. The probing signature in the western approach sector was within normal parameters. Nothing anomalous. He filed the dispatch and returned to the mapping. At the 6th hour, she said, the commission extension filing is ready for your review. He reviewed it. The legal argument was precise. Birin's operational connection to the church's guiding council authority, the founding charter as documentary foundation, the commission's jurisdiction over cross-border institutional coordination affecting frontier security. The language was Seraphine's, complete, without excess, every sentence carrying weight. He said, file it. She said, tomorrow morning. Commission Capital Office receipt before the reconvening notice goes to members. He said, yes. That evening, they worked at the main table and the study respectively, the configuration they had maintained for 3 years. At the 9th hour, she came to the main table with a question about Step 38, the Academy Personnel Review Mechanism, and they argued about it for 20 minutes, which produced a revision that was better than either of their initial positions. She said, there. He said, yes. She returned to the study. He worked. The plan was 49 pages. 11 of her improvements were in it. 1 structural correction. 1 joint revision on Step 38. It was the most complete operational document he had ever produced. It was not finished. It would not be finished for years. It was enough to begin. They tested the 12th steps revision at the 10th hour. The question was practical. If certain church hospitals showed operational signatures consistent with mechanism infrastructure, patient intake records routed through assessment channels that fed data into programs unrelated to treatment, then Tier 3 surgical separation could not treat all hospitals as equivalent service institutions. Some would require documentation before any appointment challenge, because moving on the wrong target would produce exactly the public opposition the order had designed for. Kael had 3 candidate facilities from the Birin records. Seraphine had 2 from her Year 9 church file. They cross-referenced for 4 hours. 1 facility in the Gareth Sultanate's northern district matched both lists. She said, mechanism infrastructure. He said, yes. She said, Step 44's separate communication track. He said, yes. She wrote the facility into the Tier 1 mechanism track with the specific notation she used for confirmed findings, date, source thread, confidence grade, dependency implications for steps 29 through 34. He watched her write it and thought about the division she had named architecture and localization, and how it had produced, in 3 years of unspoken practice, a working method that neither of them had designed explicitly and both of them relied on completely. At midnight, the Southern Dispatch came again. 116 days. Normal parameters. He noted it and continued the mapping. The plan was 49 pages. The opponent was a century old. The work was beginning. At the second hour past midnight, she came back to the main table with Step 22's political sequencing revised again, not because the revision was wrong, but because the Ironmark ceasefire's formal record had given her a new opening in the Davin-Crest counterframe she wanted to test against his likely noble counsel argument. They worked the counterframe for 40 minutes. He said, if he leads with aspirational language, you lead with the martial representative's signature. She said, yes. If he leads with the compact's lack of formal crown recognition, I lead with the ceasefire term's operational acknowledgement clause and ask him to explain why the Ironmark signed it. He said, good. She said, Step 38's joint revision holds. He said, yes. She returned to the study. The barony's night settled into the particular silence of a place that was working hard and not sleeping. The garrison lamps burned. The Southern Pool Data Collection Point sent its 116th day report at the 3rd hour, normal parameters. He read it and thought about Gareth's sentence at the evening meal. Long quiet cycles end. He filed the report. He continued the appointment mapping. The plan was 49 pages. The work was beginning. He slept for 3 hours before dawn and returned to the mechanism track with the Harith Northern District Hospital's intake routing spread across the secondary table, patient records, assessment channel logs, the Birin cross-reference. Seraphine's Year 9 notation. The pattern was consistent. The facility was mechanism infrastructure. Tier 3 would need to know which cuts were surgical and which were catastrophic. That was Step 12's purpose. That was why she had moved it. Outside, the frontier dawn came through the command post's eastern windows, late August, the suggestion of autumn already present in the air's edge. The southern corridor reported 116 days of quiet. He noted the number. He did not trust it. He continued the mechanism track. Seraphine came in at the 2nd hour with the commission extension filing's final review complete and the 3 noble council framing letters sealed. She set them on the main table in the order they would depart. She said, today. He said, yes. She said, Tier 1 begins when the filing confirms. He said, yes. They worked. The commission filing would depart at dawn. The long quiet cycle had 116 days on it. He did not trust the quiet. You're infuriating, she said. He looked up from Step 38's revised dependency chain. She was standing at the study door with the specific expression she wore when she had been working on something that had produced a conclusion she found simultaneously correct and irritating. He said, which part? She said, Step 38. The joint revision. You had the Academy review mechanism right. I had the political cover sequence right. The joint version is better than either of us would have produced alone. She paused. I don't enjoy being predictable. He said, you're not predictable. You're correct. She said, that's worse. He almost smiled. He caught it at the edge, the specific muscular intention of a smile that had not been permitted to complete, and redirected it into the document, which was where he redirected most things that threatened to become visible. She saw it anyway. She was very good at seeing things. She looked at him for a moment longer than the conversation required, not the assessing look, not the working look. Something that did not have a category he was prepared to name at the command post's main table at the 9th hour of an August evening with the 50-step plan open between them. Then she looked away. She said, the plan is ready to execute. He said, Tier 1 begins tomorrow. She said, yes. He said, you improved the plan. She said, of course I did. It needed it. She picked up her document case. The Noble Council framing letters go out tomorrow with the commission filing. I'll need the Ironmark ceasefire formal record from Halvor's archive copy. He said, I'll have it on your desk by morning. She said, good. She went to the study. He sat with the almost smile and the moment that had not been named and the 49-page plan that was the most significant thing he had built since the intelligence network itself. He filed the moment where he filed things he was not examining. He returned to the plan. They were back at work by the second hour. The commission extension filing went out at dawn, routed through the commission's frontier office, then the southern regional office, then the capital office, arriving in the receipt log at the 11th hour with the timestamp that mattered. 2 days before the Noble Council reconvening notice went to members. Seraphine's framing letters went with it, 3 separate correspondences, 3 different couriers, 3 different routing paths that would not appear connected in any capital administrative log. He spent the day on Tier 1, Step 1, the appointment mapping gap analysis. She spent the day on the Noble Council framing. At the evening meal, they sat at the same table without discussing the plan, which was the specific companionable silence of 2 people who had said what needed saying about the work and were now eating, because eating was a requirement the work did not suspend. Gareth came in from the garrison yard and sat at the end of the table with the particular ease of a man who had learned long ago when to be present and when to be invisible, and was choosing present tonight. He said, "The Southern Pool data came in clean." Kael said, 115 days. Gareth said, 115 days. He ate. Long quiet cycles end. Kael said, yes. Gareth looked at him. The look was not alarm. Gareth did not do alarm in the way other people did alarm. It was the look of a man who had been watching frontier patterns for 50 years and knew what a long quiet cycle meant. He said, I'll run the southern perimeter check myself tomorrow. Kael said, yes. Seraphine said, the commission filing arrived. Gareth said, good. He did not ask what the filing contained. He had learned, over 9 years, when Kael's work was in a phase that would be explained when it needed to be explained. They finished the meal. Gareth went back to the yard. Kael and Seraphine went back to the work. The dynamic was what it had been for 3 years. Precise, careful, warm in what they did rather than what they said. 2 people who had decided independently to be in the same space doing the same work and had found, without discussing when it happened, that the reasons had changed. She had improved the plan. He had almost smiled. They were back at work. That was the dynamic. It was enough. Before dawn on August 25th, he pulled Halvor's ceasefire archive from the Northern Command correspondence and extracted the formal acknowledgement language Seraphine had requested, the Ironmark Marshal Representative's signature block. The clause recognizing Frontier Auxiliary Forces' legitimate military operations during the Ashenvale engagement, the timestamp that placed it in the formal record 11 days before the commission extension filing. He left it on her desk with the secondary documents she would need, Qasim's liaison authorization, the Compact Charter's cross-border military cooperation clause, the Wartime Advisory Council's preliminary filing reference. She came in at the second hour and read the signature block without comment. She said, Davin Crest will argue this doesn't constitute foreign recognition of the compact. He said, yes. She said, the argument fails if we present the clause before he frames it as aspirational language. Framing first. Evidence second. He won't have a counterframe prepared. He said, yes. She filed the documents in the Noble Council packet sequence. At the third hour, he began Tier 1, Step 1 in earnest, the 40% gap in church appointment mapping. The cross-border positions were the weak point, as the founding charter analysis had predicted. 3 Harith Sultanate ecclesiastical appointments appeared in the Burin records without corresponding commission documentation. He wrote to Torrens' correspondent with a specific request, Seleni Silverlight order filing patterns for Eastern Kingdom partner institutions last 20 years. The correspondent would not know why he was asking. That was the network working correctly. Gareth ran the southern perimeter check at the 6th hour and returned with the same clean report and the same look. Kael said, 116 days. Gareth said, 117 by tonight. Kael said, yes. The dynamic held, work, precision, the warmth that lived in what they did together rather than what they named. She improved the plan. He almost smiled. Gareth watched the southern tree line with the patience of 50 years of frontier experience. The long quiet cycle had 117 days on it. Long quiet cycles ended. They worked as if they believed the quiet could be used, and as if they knew it could not be trusted. At the Commission Capital Office, the extension filing arrived in the receipt log at the 11th hour, timestamp confirmed by Torrens correspondent before nightfall. Seraphine received the confirmation at the study desk and did not celebrate. She checked the timestamp against the reconvening notice schedule and wrote in the margin, 2 days. Sufficient. Kael spent the afternoon on the Mechanism Track's first candidate facility, patient intake routing in the Gareth Northern District Hospital, cross-referenced against Birin's operational records and Seraphine's Year 9 church file. The pattern held. Mechanism infrastructure, not service infrastructure. He documented it with the same precision he used for military intelligence, source, date, confidence, dependency implications. At the evening meal, no one spoke about the order by name. Gareth spoke about the southern tree line's bird patterns, a minor shift, nothing conclusive, the kind of observation a man made when he was watching for something larger and had learned not to alarm the household prematurely. Seraphine spoke about Commissioner Vare's expected response time to the extension filing. Kael listened to both and filed both. The dynamic held. The quiet held. 117 days. He did not trust it. The Commission extension filing's timestamp sat in the receipt log 2 days ahead of the reconvening notice. Seraphine had checked it twice. The framing letters were in transit. The 50-step plan's Tier 1 had begun. The southern tree line held its 117-day quiet. Gareth would run the perimeter again tomorrow. Kael returned to the appointment mapping and worked until the lamps burned low. The southern pool data stopped being clean on September 3rd. Gareth had run the perimeter check himself on August 26th, as he had said he would, and returned with a report that was consistent with 122 days of quiet, probing signatures within normal parameters. Western approach cycle completing without anomaly, the border seal chain anchors in the local sector reading at full capacity since the Commission maintenance team had completed repairs in February. Kael had noted the report and continued Tier 1. On September 3rd, the Western Approach collection point sent a signal that was not a probing signature. It was an assault signature. The first report arrived at the second hour past midday. Demon force at scale, moving on the southern border seal sector's western anchor cluster. Not the probing rhythm Kael had been tracking for 3 years. Not the raid pattern of the incursion period. A committed advance, multiple gold equivalent signatures, organized formation, speed consistent with a force that was not trying to test the perimeter, but trying to break through it. The second report arrived 14 minutes later, simultaneous movement on the eastern anchor cluster and the central relay point. 3 anchor positions. 3 assault vectors. Coordinated. He was at the main table when the third report came in from the Gareth Sultanate's northern military liaison, a man named Qasim, who Seraphine had established correspondence with in Year 11 through the supply agreement negotiations. Qasim's report was not military intelligence in the frontier sense. It was casualty accounting. The Sultanate's northern garrison had engaged the eastern assault vector at the seal boundary. They were taking heavy casualties. The demon force on that vector was larger than any single engagement the southern frontier had seen in the incursion period. He read Qasim's report twice. He said, "Vethera." Seraphine was at the study door. She had heard the reports come in. The garrison captain's dispatch rhythm had changed, which was a language they both understood. She said, "The seal gaps." He said, "She couldn't achieve the incursion goals through the gaps Birin created. The gaps are closed. This is the direct approach, break the anchors, not slip through them." She said, 3 simultaneously. He said, "She's been building the force during the quiet cycle." 122 days wasn't peace. It was preparation. He spread the map. The 3 anchor positions, western cluster, eastern cluster, central relay, formed a triangle across the southern border seal sector. Breaking all 3 simultaneously would create a corridor wide enough for a major force to cross. The Gareth Sultanate's northern garrison held the eastern vector. The compact's southern frontier garrison held the western. The central relay was the infrastructure point that maintained the seal chain's coherence across the sector. The 50-step plan had accounted for southern pressure. It had not accounted for the scale this soon. He said, Qasim's casualties. She read the report. Her expression did not change. She had learned, over 3 years at the frontier, to receive bad numbers without letting the numbers reach her face before she had processed them. She said, the Sultanate can't hold the eastern vector alone. He said, no. She said, the compact's southern garrison can hold the western vector and the central relay simultaneously with current disposition. He said, no. She said, Gareth. He said, yes. The northern dispatch arrived at the 4th hour. It was not Southern intelligence, it was from Halvar's regional command, routed through the ceasefire monitoring channel. The Iron Mark had not broken the ceasefire. But the Ashenvale Valley's demilitarized status was being tested. A Royal Army contingent of 4,000, officially a ceasefire monitoring force, had repositioned to the valley's southern approach in a configuration that was not monitoring and was not overtly hostile, but was the specific configuration of a force waiting for a reason to become hostile. The ceasefire was holding. The positioning was not. He read Halvar's analysis. The monitoring force's commander is order-affiliated, confirmed through Torrens' correspondent. The repositioning is not a ceasefire violation. It is preparation for a political violation. The moment the southern front collapses, the northern monitoring force becomes a northern occupying force. And the compact is fighting 2 fronts with the kingdom's formal military on one and demons on the other. He set the dispatch down. Seraphine said, they coordinated it. He said, yes. She said, the southern assault and the northern repositioning. The order needed the southern front to collapse to justify the northern occupation. Vethera is the instrument on the south. The monitoring force is the instrument on the north. He said, yes. She said, you have to go north. He said, yes. She said, Gareth has the south. He said, yes. He wrote the southern defense disposition in 12 minutes, garrison redeployment, militia call-up, the central relay's defensive geometry, the supply line priorities. He wrote Gareth's authority into every line of it, full command of the southern frontier holding action, his signature on every decision. Kael's strategic intent translated into operational orders that Gareth could execute without waiting for consultation. He did not write that he was giving Gareth the South because Gareth was the person he trusted with it. That was in the document without being in the document. He sealed the orders. He said, I'll be at Ashenvale within 4 days. She said, I'll hold the command post. Qasim's liaison. The commission filing follow-up. The Noble Council reconvening in 2 weeks. He said, yes. Gareth came in at the 5th hour. He read the southern disposition without speaking. He read the authority grant. He looked at Kael. He said, the central relay is the problem. Kael said, yes. Gareth said, I'll hold it. Kael said, yes. Gareth said, go north. Kael left at dawn on September 4th. The southern sky behind the command post was clear. The assault signatures on the pooled data were not. The south was collapsing faster than the plan had accounted for. He rode north and did not look back, because looking back was a luxury the southern front could not afford from him, and the northern front could not afford from him either. The eye held its 2,000-meter radius as he rode. The southern corridor's assault signatures were already at the edge of its range, burning against the quiet that had never been peace. Seraphine sent the first Qasim liaison escalation before his horse cleared the barony's northern gate. Formal request for Harith Sultanate Military Coordination Authority under the Compact's cross-border clause, routed through Commissioner Vare's office to give it commission standing. The request would not produce immediate reinforcements. It would produce a paper trail that mattered when the reconvening came, evidence that the southern collapse was not a frontier barony problem, but a continental defense failure requiring institutional response. Gareth watched the northern road from the command ridge until the riders were out of sight. Then he turned to the southern disposition map and began the work Kael had left him. The central relay was the problem. He had said so. He would hold it. At Ashenvale, Kael met Halvar at the 4th hour on September 5th. The monitoring force had not advanced. The configuration remained, for 1,000 Royal Army fighters in the southern approach, order-affiliated commander, waiting. Halvar's assessment matched Kael's. Not a ceasefire violation, a political trap waiting for the southern collapse to justify occupation. Halvar said, "How bad?" Kael said, "Bad enough that I'm here." Halvar said, "Gareth." Kael said, "Yes." Halvar was quiet. He had known Gareth longer than Kael had. Different service, same kingdom, the particular respect of military men who had seen each other work. He said, "Hold the valley. I'll hold the monitoring force's attention." Kael said, "Yes." He rode south again on September 6th when the Thornford dispatch arrived. He did not arrive in time to change the geometry. He arrived in time to help Gareth up. The Southern Front would not forgive the delay. It would not forgive anything for the next 6 weeks. He knew that before he dismounted at the secondary perimeter and saw Gareth sitting against the stone wall with the particular stillness of a man who had spent everything and was now accounting for what remained. The supply position was called Thornford, a way station on the southern supply corridor where the Barin Barony's eastern road met the frontier militia's primary resupply line. It was not strategically important in the sense that losing it would break the southern defense. It was important in the sense that 300 frontier militia were there when the demon flanking element came through the western anchor breach. And 300 militia without a withdrawal route were 300 people who would stop being militia and start being casualties. Gareth read the situation from the command ridge at the 4th hour past dawn on September 7th. The western anchor had held for 68 hours and then failed, not catastrophically, but enough. A gap. A demon force through the gap. The main assault on the central relay was the primary pressure. The flanking element through the western breach was the geometry problem. It had moved faster than the defensive redeployment, which was the specific failure mode of a force that had been preparing for 122 days against a defense that had been preparing for 8 months. The flanking element was approximately 800 fighters. Gold equivalent signatures in the leading cohort. 1 diamond equivalent commander at the rear, holding back, the demon equivalent of a professional who did not spend core output until the geometry required it. The 300 militia at Thornford were surrounded. Gareth had 420 fighters under his direct command. The central relay's defense required 300 of them. He had 120 available for a relief action. 120 against 800 was not a relief action. It was a gesture. The gesture that mattered was the withdrawal route. He sent the order to Thornford through the militia captain's signal code. Withdraw north-northwest through the river cut. Do not engage the flanking element. Move now. The captain's acknowledgement came back in 4 minutes. The demon flanking element's leading cohort was already between Thornford and the river cut. Gareth looked at the geometry for a long moment. He had been a diamond aura practitioner for 41 years. He had fought in 3 major conflicts and dozens of smaller ones. He had trained Kael for 9 years with the specific understanding that the boy, the young man, now would eventually exceed him, and that his role was to be present until that happened and useful after it. He had not expected useful to mean this. He said to the garrison sergeant beside him, "Command of the central relay defense passes to Captain Marin. Hold the relay. Do not commit the reserve north of the river until I return or until the withdrawal signal confirms the militia is clear." The sergeant said, "Sir." Gareth said, "Hold the relay." He went down the ridge. Kael was at Ashenvale on September 7th. He had arrived the previous evening. The Royal Army Monitoring Forces repositioning had not advanced further, yet, but Halvar's intelligence confirmed the commander's order affiliation and the configuration's purpose. Kael had spent the night in the specific work of political stabilization. Correspondence with the 3 Noble Council members Seraphine had framed, a direct communication to Halvar establishing the compact ceasefire monitoring authority in the valley. A filing through the Wartime Advisory Council's preliminary channel that placed the monitoring forces repositioning in the formal record as a matter requiring Noble Council review. The Southern Dispatch arrived at the 2nd hour. Thornford surrounded. Gareth moving to cover withdrawal. Kael read it standing. He did not have a tactical option. Ashenvale required him. The monitoring force required him. The Northern Front's political stability required him. The Southern Front required Gareth. He had known, when he left the command post on September 4th, that this was the division. He had known it the way he knew things he could not change, completely, without illusion. He wrote to Halvar, "Hold the valley. I will not be drawn south." He did not write to Gareth. Gareth did not need a message. Gareth needed the militia clear. Gareth reached the Thornford perimeter at the 6th hour. The demon flanking element had not committed to assaulting the way station. They were holding position, which meant the diamond equivalent commander had assessed the geometry and decided the militia were contained without requiring full engagement. Professional. Patient. The kind of opponent who cost you the most because they did not waste resources on fights they did not need to win. The militia needed to move north-northwest through the river cut. The flanking element was between Thornford and the river cut. Gareth walked into the space between them. He did not perform the farmhand entry he had used against the bandits 9 years ago. This was not misdirection. This was something else. He extended his diamond aura to its absolute maximum. Not the third of capability he had used in the Orland farmyard. Not the training output he had used with Kael in the courtyard. The full extension. The radius that a diamond practitioner built over 40 years of cultivation, pushed past every sustainable limit, held not for the duration of a fight, but for the duration of a retreat. The space between Thornford and the river cut became, for the purposes of a demon flanking element's advance, impassable. The militia moved. Gareth held. The withdrawal took 41 minutes. Kael felt it at a Shen Vale, not the details, not the geometry, but the signature. A diamond aura at full extension sustained, in the southern direction. The eye's 2,000-meter radius did not reach Thornford. Something in the core did. He stood at the Ashenvale command position and did not move south. The signature held for 41 minutes. Then it changed. Not extinguished, changed. The quality of a core that had been pushed past every limit and was now doing something cores were not designed to do, burning the accumulated cultivation to fuel the extension beyond sustainable duration. He knew what that meant. He stood very still. They found Gareth 2 hours later. Not at Thornford, north of the river cut, where the militia's withdrawal route had ended and the terrain opened into the relay defense's secondary perimeter. He was sitting against a stone wall with the particular posture of a man who had completed something and was now accounting for what it had cost. The militia captain, a woman named Thus, who Gareth had trained in the courtyard 6 years ago, was beside him. Thus said, 300 clear. 0 pursuit past the river cut. Gareth said, good. Kael arrived 14 hours later, riding through the night because the Ashenvale stabilization had held and Halvar had the valley and the monitoring force had not advanced and there was nothing left in the north that required him more than this. He dismounted at the secondary perimeter. Gareth looked at him. His aura was gone. Not suppressed. Not injured. Gone. The specific absence of a signature that had been present in every room Gareth had occupied for 9 years. The way certain constants were present without being noticed until they stopped. Gareth's core was burned out. The diamond aura he had spent 50 years building had been spent in 41 minutes, covering a withdrawal route for 300 militia who would have died without it. He was alive. He would never fight again. Kael looked at him. Gareth said, stop looking at me like that. I'm not dead. Kael said, I know. Gareth said, the relay. Kael said, holding. Marin has it. Gareth said, good. He looked at his hands. The hands that had trained a saint's early exercise and an 11-year-old's wall runs and a 17-year-old's diamond breakthrough. The boy did the right thing. Staying north. Kael said, yes. Gareth said, don't argue with me about whether it was the right thing. It was. He closed his eyes. 300 clear. Kael said, yes. He sat beside Gareth against the stone wall and did not speak for a long time. The southern front was still burning. The central relay was still holding. The militia were clear. Gareth was alive. The cost was in the absence where his aura had been. Kael filed the grief where he filed things he could not afford to stop for. He would grieve later. There was a war to fight. Gareth said, help me up. Kael helped him up. They walked to the infirmary together. The grief was private and brief. He allowed it 1 hour in the infirmary's secondary room. After the healer had confirmed what they already knew, Gareth's core was burned out, not damaged in the reparable sense, Not injured in the way ribs and arms were injured after the Year 11 assault. Burned out. The accumulated cultivation of 50 years spent. He would live. He would not fight. Kael sat in the chair beside the bed and looked at the wall and let the hour pass. Then he stood up and went to the command post. The southern front's geometry had changed overnight. The western anchor breach was stable. The demon force had not pushed further north than the flanking element's position, which meant Vethera was consolidating the breach rather than exploiting it immediately. The central relay held. The eastern vector was the crisis. Qasim's latest report placed Gareth's Sultanate casualties at 40% of the northern garrison's fighting strength, and the demon assault on the eastern anchor cluster had not broken through, but was grinding the garrison down through sustained pressure. The 50-step plan had a southern front assumption: managed pressure, sequenced response, years of Tier 1 intelligence before visible action. The southern front had a different assumption now: collapse on a timeline measured in weeks, not years. He needed a decision that stopped the collapse without requiring resources the compact did not have. He spread the map at the second hour and looked at the Birin barony's eastern territory. Lord Birin was in commission custody. The barony's governance had passed to an interim compact administration. The eastern quarter's farming settlements, the transit roads, the secondary supply corridors that fed the southern frontier's western sector. The territory was not heavily populated. It was not strategically defensible against a major demon force. It was, however, the most direct advance route from the western anchor breach toward the central relay's secondary perimeter. If the demon force advanced through Birin's eastern territory, they would reach the relay's supply corridor in 4 days. If the demon force advanced through Birin's eastern territory and found nothing to sustain them, no supply caches, no intact roads, no population centers to forage from, they would reach the relay's supply corridor in 4 days with an empty logistics chain behind them. He wrote the calculation twice. The sacrifice was deliberate. He did not call it that in the orders. He called it a controlled withdrawal from indefensible positions with denial of resources protocols applied to the abandoned territory. The language was military and accurate. The reality was that he was giving Vethera's advance force the Birin barony's eastern quarter and removing everything from that quarter that would make the advance sustainable. The compact lords received their assignments through the channel Kael had built over 3 years. Aldenvane to coordinate the civilian evacuation from the eastern settlements, 48 hours, no exceptions. Brennan to execute the road denial, the specific engineering that made transit corridors impassable without weeks of repair work. Ketterly to manage the supply cache relocation and the false cache placement, the latter being the intelligence operation that would send demon logistics toward empty stores. Lady Merrick to handle the legal documentation that would, after the fact, establish the territory's abandonment as a military necessity rather than a political concession. The sovereigns I coordinated it. Not at 2,000-meter ambient, at the engagement scale, the full battlefield extension he had learned in the Year 11 assault and refined at Ashenvale and Diamond. He held the southern front's geometry in his perception and moved the compact's pieces through it the way he moved pieces on a board he could see completely. Aldenvane's evacuation column clear of the eastern quarter at hour 36. Brennan's road denial complete at hour 41. Ketterly's false caches in position at hour 44. The demon advance force entering the eastern quarter at hour 52, finding the denial, finding the false caches, committing logistics to the false stores. The advance continued. It was slower. It was hungry. He collapsed the supply lines behind it. Brennan's cavalry, not in a flanking arc but in a logistics interdiction pattern, hitting the demon force's rear supply chain at the 3 points where the western anchor breach's logistics corridor was narrowest. Ketterly's merchant network contacts in the southern market towns, redirected to report demon supply movements through channels that reached Kael before they reached Vethera's command. The Koval channel, a message to Veth, brief, factual. The order is using Vethera's advance. The advance's logistics are the vulnerability. He did not ask Veth for help. He told Veth where the vulnerability was. The demon advance stalled at the Birin eastern quarter's northern edge, not because it had been stopped, but because it had outrun its supply and found nothing ahead that would feed it. The Eastern Territory was devastated. The farming settlements were empty. The roads were broken. The stores were false or absent. The demon force held position. The Central Relay's secondary perimeter held. Qasim's report on September 12th, the Eastern Anchor assault had reduced pressure, not because the demon force had withdrawn, but because Vethra had redirected resources from the Eastern Vector to support the stalled Western advance. The Southern Front was not stable. It was no longer collapsing. He went to the infirmary at the end of the 4th day. Gareth was sitting up. The healer had said he could sit up. The healer had not said he could fight, and Gareth had not asked. Gareth said, "Birin's Eastern Quarter." Kael said, "Yes." Gareth said, "Deliberate." Kael said, "Yes." Gareth was quiet for a moment. The settlements. Kael said, "Evacuated. 48 hours. Aldenvane." Gareth said, "Good." Another pause. The demon advance. Kael said, "Stalled. Logistics interdiction. They hold the territory. They can't feed the advance." Gareth said, "How long?" Kael said, "Weeks. Maybe less if Vethra redirects again. The Eastern Vector pressure on Qasim has reduced." Gareth said, "The gamble." Kael said, "Yes." Gareth looked at his hands. It was the right gamble. Kael said, "Yes." Gareth said, "Don't tell me you're sorry about the territory." Kael said, "I'm not sorry about the territory. I'm sorry about you." Gareth said, "Don't be." He looked at Kael. "I'm not dead. 300 militia are not dead. You made the call that kept the relay holding and kept you at Ashenvale when the North needed you." He paused. "I've been training you for 9 years to make that call." Kael said nothing. Gareth said, "Go back to work." Kael went back to work. The grief was private and brief. The war was not. Seraphine arrived at the Southern Command Post on September 13th with the Noble Council reconvening packet complete and the expression she wore when she had been sleeping in intervals rather than in blocks. She read the casualty accounting from the Birin Eastern Quarter, 0 civilian deaths, 48-hour evacuation complete, Aldenvane's report filed with the Commission, and said, "The gamble's political cost." He said, "Yes." She said, "Davin Crest will call it abandonment of Allied territory." He said, "Yes." She said, "I'll call it denial of resources protocols applied to prevent a supply corridor breach that would have cost Qasim's garrison and the Central Relay." She looked at the map. The reconvening is in 6 days. The demon political collapse will be in the record by then. The order removed the demon emperor. The Southern assault and the Northern monitoring force repositioning were coordinated preparation. She paused. The Birin sacrifice is evidence that the compact can make hard decisions without breaking. That's the argument. He said, "Yes." She said, "Gareth." He said, "In the infirmary." Sitting up. She was quiet for a moment. The plan assumed he would be fighting in Tier 3. He said, "Yes." She said, "We revise." He said, "Yes." They revised at the main table until the second hour past midnight. The grief stayed filed. The work did not. In the infirmary that night, Gareth slept for the first time since Thornford. Kael sat in the chair and ran the Birin Gamble's numbers again, not because the numbers had changed, but because the habit of verification was the only thing that kept the grief from becoming the kind of paralysis the Southern Front could not afford. The advance had stalled. The relay held. Qasim's casualties were stabilizing. The cost was in the Eastern Quarter's empty fields and in the absence where Gareth's aura had been. He wrote to Halvar, "Southern Front stabilized temporarily. Northern monitoring force unchanged. Return to Ashenvale not required before reconvening preparation." He did not write, "Gareth is burned out." He did not need to. Halvar would know by morning. The grief stayed filed. The work did not. Veth's packet arrived on September 14th. It came through the Koval channel, not the routine document path, but the faster routing Veth used when the information exceeded routine priority. The packet was thin. 1 document. Demon script with Veth's translation appended in the careful commercial hand Kael had learned to recognize over the past year. He read it at the main table in the Southern Command Post, which he had returned to on September 11th when the Birin Gamble had stabilized enough that Ashenvale could hold without him and the Southern Front required direct command. The translation read, "The patient one is dead. Not by human hand. Not by demon faction. By an agent who had been in the court for 11 years, embedded before the current equilibrium, positioned in the administrative layer that managed the Emperor's personal security rotation. The agent's affiliation is the organization you have been naming. The Order of the Stars that do not fall. The assassination was not announced. The court is managing the succession question privately. This will not hold. The Seven Lords will know within days. The council authority that bound them to the equilibrium is gone. Vethera will move first. She has the largest force in position and the most to gain from chaos. The peace faction, Lord Keth's domain, my origin, does not have the military capacity to enforce order. We have the intelligence capacity to document what follows. The order removed the stabilizing force. This was the purpose. The southern assault, the anchor breaches, the logistics your network has been interdicting, these were preparation. The Emperor's death is the event. I am not offering alliance. I am offering information. The channel remains open. He read it twice. He set it down. Seraphine was at the command post. She had ridden south on September 9th when the southern collapse's severity became clear, leaving the Noble Council reconvening preparation with Commissioner Vere's office and arriving with the specific efficiency of someone who had decided where the work required her. She read the translation. She said, 11 years. He said, yes. She said, the Demon Emperor. The patient one. She looked at the document. The order embedded an agent in the Demon Emperor's court for 11 years to remove the one demon political figure who kept the Seven Lords from tearing each other apart. He said, yes. She said, the Southern Assault. The anchor breaches. The Northern Monitoring Force repositioning. The Barin Territory sacrifice. She paused. All preparation for this. He said, yes. She said, the clearing mechanism doesn't require demon-human war. It requires chaos. Demon political chaos serves the same function as human succession crisis. Institutional collapse at every level simultaneously. He said, yes. She said, the 50-step plan. He said, needs revision. She said, yes. She sat down. The demon front is no longer a frontier incursion problem. It's a continental political collapse problem. Vethera will try to claim dominance. The other lords will resist. The southern force that was coordinating through Vethera will fragment. He said, the order knew that. She said, the order designed for it. She looked at the document. Your father's investigation. The church contractors. The supply chains. The restoration. A pause. They've been building toward a world where every institution, human and demon, is simultaneously collapsing. We're in it. He said, yes. He wrote to Veth through the Koval channel. Received. Document everything. The peace faction's intelligence is now Tier 1 priority. He wrote to Torin's correspondent. Demon political situation, Emperor assassination, Order-affiliated agent, 11-year embed. Full capital network alert. Cross-reference with Silverlight Order correspondence on preparation timeline. He wrote to Halvar, Northern Monitoring Force, hold position. Do not interpret Southern Demon Chaos as ceasefire opportunity for Royal Army advance. The letters went out. The Demon Emperor was dead. The Order had removed the stabilizing force in demon politics the way they had been removing stabilizing forces in human politics for a century. The Southern Front was about to become something the 50-step plan had not been built for. He filed the document and returned to the map. The patient one had kept demon politics relatively stable for a generation. The generation was over. He cross-referenced Veth's packet against the combined picture from August, the ecology on the walls, the Silverlight Order correspondence, the demon historical records 130-year thread. The assassination did not change the Order's goal. It accelerated the clearing mechanism on the demon side of the border seal with the same institutional patience the founding charter described. Preparation over decades, event over years, chaos as the product rather than the failure. The agent's 11-year embed was the detail that stayed with him. 11 years in the Demon Emperor's administrative layer, not as a fighter, not as an obvious operative, but as a functionary in the security rotation management, the kind of position that was invisible because it was bureaucratic. The order did not require dramatic infiltration. It required positions that controlled scheduling. He wrote in the private document, "They are patient in a way that makes our 9 years look like improvisation. We are not improvising. We are building faster than they expected. That is not the same as building faster than they prepared." Seraphine said, "Commissioner Vare needs this before the reconvening." He said, "Yes." She said, "Not the full Veth channel sourcing. The factual core. Emperor dead. Order affiliated agent. Demon political equilibrium ended." He said, "I'll draft it." She said, "I'll deliver it." He drafted it in the specific language the commission required: evidence grades, source protection, jurisdictional framing that placed the assassination inside the commission case's cross-border coordination mandate without exposing the Koval channel's existence. She read it once and filed it for morning dispatch. The demon emperor was dead. The order had spent 11 years to make it happen. Kael had spent 9 years building the counter. The reconvening was 5 days away. He returned to the map and began marking the fragmented southern elements in colors that meant contested, withdrawn, incoherent, and dangerous because incoherent. Veth's second packet arrived 6 hours later, shorter than the first, in the same commercial hand. The court's private succession management has failed. 3 lords have issued formal rejection of Vethra's dominance claim. 2 more are silent, which in demon politics is its own statement. The Southern Force command structure is fragmenting along domain lines, Ash domain elements holding position, Keth domain elements withdrawing from the unified assault, 2 minor domains issuing contradictory orders to units that were, until yesterday, a single force. The order's agent is not in the court anymore. That is the only clean fact. Everything else is chaos. Kael read it to Seraphine. She said, 5 days to reconvening. He said, yes. She said, we file Vare's packet in the morning. We file the demon political collapse as supporting evidence. We do not name Veth's channel. He said, yes. The demon emperor was dead. The Southern Force was fragmenting. The 50-step plan had a contingency sequence overlay and draft. The reconvening was 5 days away. He marked the map and kept working until dawn. The order had spent 11 years on the demon emperor. Kael had spent 9 years building the network that would survive the emperor's death long enough to argue against the clearing. The reconvening was 5 days away. That was not enough time. It was the time they had. He wrote to Commissioner Vare in the language of evidence grades and jurisdictional framing. He wrote to Halvar in the language of Northern Hold. He wrote to Veth in the language of documentation priority. He did not write to Gareth about the demon emperor. Gareth already knew what chaos looked like. He had been watching it for 50 years. The Southern Pool data would tell them when the chaos reached the frontier in its next form. Until then, the map required marking, the contingency sequence required drafting, and the reconvening required 5 more days of preparation. He returned to the work. The demon emperor was dead. The order had wanted chaos. The reconvening was 5 days away. He marked the map and kept working until dawn. The Southern Demon Force became incoherent overnight. Not in the sense of defeat. Vethra's advance force still held the Birin Eastern Quarter, still pressed the Western Anchor Breach, still maintained pressure on the Central Relay's secondary perimeter. In the sense of command. The orders that had been coordinating the 3-vector assault, the specific timing, the logistics interdiction responses, the Eastern Vector's pressure on Qasim's garrison, stopped making sense. Kael identified it through the pooled data at the 2nd hour past midnight on September 16th. The probing signatures had not changed. The assault signatures had not weakened. What had changed was the coordination layer, the specific quality in the data that indicated a single command authority directing multiple elements. The quality was gone. The elements were still moving. They were moving in directions that did not reinforce each other. He spread the intelligence from Veth's channel, Qasim's liaison reports, and the frontier pool data across the main table. The picture assembled in 20 minutes. Without the Demon Emperor's council authority, the 7 demon lords were no longer bound by the equilibrium that had kept demon politics in a managed state for a generation. Vethra had the largest force in position and the most immediate military advantage. She moved first, issuing dominance claims through her command channel that the other lords were not acknowledging. 3 other demon lords, Keth's domain among them, Veth had noted, resisted the dominance claim. The southern force that had been operating under Vethra's unified command received conflicting orders within 6 hours of the Emperor's death becoming known in demon territory. The force fragmented. Not dissolved, fragmented. Elements held position. Elements withdrew. Elements continued advancing on vectors their local commanders had been given before the fragmentation and had not yet received countermanding orders for. The Western Anchor Breach's demon contingent split, approximately half holding the breach, approximately half moving south without clear objective, responding to an order that had been superseded by an order that had been superseded by chaos. Kasim's report from the Eastern Vector, the assault pressure had reduced by 60% in 18 hours. Not because the demons had withdrawn, because the Eastern assault element had received conflicting orders and was holding position pending resolution of the command dispute. The Southern Front had become incoherent. He briefed Seraphine at dawn. She had the specific expression of someone who had been awake for most of the night working on the Noble Council reconvening preparation and was now receiving intelligence that made the reconvening preparation more urgent and more complicated simultaneously. He said, Vethra is attempting dominance. 3 lords are resisting. The southern force is fragmenting. She said, the order's design. He said, yes. She said, chaos at every level. Human succession crisis. Demon political collapse. Church institutional embeddedness. Noble Council infiltration. She looked at the map. The clearing mechanism doesn't need any single front to win. It needs all fronts to be on fire simultaneously. He said, yes. She said, the 50-step plan assumed managed pressure. We have unmanaged collapse. He said, yes. She said, reconvening in 9 days. He said, yes. She said, the framing letters. The commission extension. The founding charter in the record. She paused. We present the order's structure at the reconvening. Not the complete appointment mapping, we don't have it. The structure. The goal. The church distinction. The evidence that the clearing mechanism is operating on both sides of the border seal. He said, can you hold the political argument while the Southern Front is incoherent? She said, I can hold the political argument because the Southern Front is incoherent. The demon political collapse is evidence. The order removed the demon emperor. The order is not fighting the demons. The order is using the demons. She picked up her document case. 9 days. He said, yes. Gareth was in the infirmary. Kael went to him at the 6th hour with the Southern Front's updated disposition, the fragmented demon elements mapped, the coordination gap identified, the central relays holding status confirmed. Gareth read the disposition. He said, incoherent. Kael said, yes. Gareth said, opportunity. Kael said, yes. Gareth said, and risk. Incoherent forces are unpredictable. They don't respond to logic. Half of Vethra's contingent holding the breach while the other half wanders south. That's not a stable situation. That's a situation that could consolidate or could spiral. Kael said, yes. Gareth said, the peace faction. Kael said, Veth's channel. Keth's domain. Intelligence priority. Gareth said, good. He looked at the disposition map. You're holding the relay. Kael said, yes. Gareth said, Birin's eastern quarter. Kael said, contested. Demon elements in position. Logistics interdiction holding. Gareth was quiet for a moment. The boy who trained in the storage room is running a continental crisis. Kael said, the boy is trying not to make a mistake that costs 300 militia. Gareth looked at him. You made the right call. Both calls. He paused. Stop waiting for me to tell you that. Kael said, yes. He went back to the command post. The Southern Front was incoherent. The Northern Front was holding. The Noble Council reconvening was 9 days away. The 50-step plan needed revision. Gareth would never fight again. The Order had removed the Demon Emperor, and the world was burning at every level they had been preparing to burn. He sat at the main table and began revising the plan. Outside, the southern corridor's fragmented assault signatures moved in directions that no longer reinforced each other. Chaos. The Order had wanted chaos. He would have to build order from it anyway. That was the work. He began. By the third hour, the revision had a name: Contingency Sequence, Unmanaged Collapse. It was not a replacement of the 50-step plan. It was an overlay, 12 additional steps inserted between Tier 1's intelligence accumulation and Tier 2's political preparation, addressing the specific failure mode of simultaneous human and demon institutional collapse. Seraphine added 4 steps on her own while he worked the military geometry, public communication protocols for demon political fragmentation, noble council framing that used the Emperor's assassination as evidence without requiring demon source disclosure in open session. Gareth Sultanate diplomatic contact through Qasim that positioned the compact as Continental Defense Coordinator rather than Valdris Frontier Auxiliary. At dawn, Qasim's 4th report arrived. The Eastern Anchor Assault had reduced to probing pressure. The Western Breach's demon contingent was split, half holding, half drifting south without objective. Vethera's dominance claim had been rejected by 3 lords formally and 2 more informally. The southern force was not defeated. It was uncommanded. Gareth came to the command post at the 7th hour, walking without assistance, which the healer had approved and which Gareth had treated as permission rather than recommendation. He read the contingency sequence overlay. He said, Step 7. Peace Faction Intelligence Priority. Kael said, Yes. Gareth said, That's channel. Lord Keth. He looked at the map. The incoherent elements will consolidate around whoever offers them a command authority they recognize. If the Peace Faction can offer an alternative to Vethera's dominance claim, you get a 3rd southern variable, not human, not order, demon internal. Kael said, Yes. Gareth said, Add it. He added it. Seraphine said, Reconvening in 8 days. Kael said, Yes. She said, We present the Order's structure, the church distinction, the demon emperor assassination, and the evidence that the clearing mechanism is operating on both sides of the seal. We do not present the 50-step plan. We present the fact that a counter exists. He said, Yes. The southern corridor's fragmented signatures moved in the pool data like a language losing its grammar. Chaos was the Order's product. Order would have to be theirs. He picked up the pen and continued the revision. At the 10th hour, the pool data confirmed what Qasim's liaison had reported. The Eastern Anchor Assault reduced to probing pressure. The Western Breach's demon contingent split. Vethera's dominance claim rejected by 3 lords formally. Incoherent did not mean safe. Incoherent meant unpredictable. Elements holding, elements withdrawing, elements advancing on superseded orders because no one had reached them with new ones yet. The Southern Front required constant revision now, not daily but hourly, the contingency sequence overlay growing in the margins of the 50-step plan. Seraphine said, 8 days. He said, Yes. She said, We present. He said, Yes. Gareth said, Hold the relay. Kael said, Yes. The Order had wanted chaos. The Noble Council reconvening was 8 days away. The southern corridor burned in fragmented signatures. He continued the revision.